the Prime Minister met with the Ethics Commissioner? And if so, how many times? Very, very simple.
This Prime Minister said he would stand up every Wednesday and answer every question that's being asked of every member on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, about the Ethics Commissioner, for the sake of my colleagues, I'll ask it again. How many times? 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 And how many times has he met with the Ethics Commissioner?
Canadians.
How many times has the Prime Minister communicated with the Ethics Commissioner? Answer the question.
Some issues in terms of calculation. I'm going to try a different angle. A, was it 0 times did he meet with the Ethics Commissioner? B, was it 1 to 5, or C, 6 to 10?
The fact is, on this side of the House, we are focused on making investments that are going to make a difference in the lives of Canadians.
The Prime Minister was getting tired of pretending to answer the question.
A message from the Government of Canada.
We need to discuss Bell, and to a larger extent, the entire state of the telecommunications industry in Canada. Much like any other industry in Canada and the US, we have an awful mix of anti-competitive behavior and borderline illegal quasi-monopolistic corporations. Companies I cannot even consider competitors, serving Canadians something resembling internet phone service. Enemy number one is Bell Canada, that has been in the news lately for misleading sales tactics. Essentially, sales reps would go door to door, offering customers plans for internet and cell phone plans, riddled with false promises and ever-escalating prices. But let's be honest here. Does anybody know anyone who actually signed up for Bell or one of the big carriers and wasn't ripped off with rising prices, random charges, and hidden fees? As much as this news likes to portray, this isn't an isolated case. Rather, it's the norm. And the real news needs to be that one person who actually signed up for TELUS, Rogers, or Bell and didn't get ripped off. Probably some guy from New Brunswick. To think that this recent scandal of essentially illegal, misleading sales is a single event is almost comically untrue, as this is the culture of ripping Canadians off time and time again. It has happened for years. And what does our government do? Well, they investigate Apple over a product that you can easily avoid by just buying a different phone, rather than crack down on the large companies who do much more damage to Canadians' pocketbooks than any single iPhone could do. From data breaches to failed services trying to get Canadians back to an era of expensive, restrictive, and uncompetitive entertainment, and then promptly shutting it down, and much like a bitter sore loser, trying to blame piracy for their shortcomings, and pushing for legislation to essentially censor the internet as they see fit under the guise of copyright protection. A slippery slope I'll get into later. To understand why Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, and even Shaw can get away with essentially running a quasi-monopoly in Canada, where prices are fixed and set high with little to no innovation, you need to understand a little bit about how telecommunications work. You see, just like electricity or water, the infrastructure to provide internet is so expensive and vast that the overhead for any new entrants who haven't been in the industry for decades or have bottomless pockets like Google is nearly impossible. This means that new competitors in the marketplace are far and few in between. Our main solution to this is to usually have government services, have it owned by the government or at least heavily controlled by the government for obvious reasons. However, in the telecom industry, there's another solution to that problem. Essentially, force the incumbent ISPs who own the infrastructure to rent out bandwidth on their system. They are contractually obligated by the CRTC to effectively rent out a portion of their bandwidth on their systems at a wholesale rate to effectively artificially insert competition. And this has worked well so far. There are good telecom companies out there, and they do their job right and never charge you a nickel more than promised. And this is great for people who don't want anything to do with the large incumbents, with the CRTC even lowering wholesale rates for smaller ISPs to give them a competitive edge. So, if your internet bill was magically lowered in 2016, you can thank this guy. However, as you can see, the big guys still get a cut of any internet traffic that goes in a network. And this still doesn't deal with the problem of ISPs maintaining an old, outdated network, miring down their customers and the companies that leased on their network in old, stagnant speeds. not to mention the underhanded tactics of the large ISPs that try to get you to sign up with them instead of their competitors. Since they own the lines, they are often the ones that install the internet link at your home and will often offer you a lower rate than their competitor at the time of installation. This is just one of their many scummy sales practices. However, for many Canadians, oftentimes the only reliable provider of cell phone service or even internet in smaller cities is the incumbents. And this often means doing business with the devil, and with the ability of the incumbent to take over smaller competitors, such as the recent takeover of Manitoba Telecom Services, a highly controversial and once quasi-government run telecom service that was recently bought out by Bell Canada. This means that you could be a Bell subscriber without ever wanting anything to do with Bell Canada. And prices went up in short order, with price hikes across the board. Is this because the cost to provide you service is magically higher, or because of inflation? No, don't drink the Bank of Canada Kool-Aid. Inflation on your food prices? Yes. But inflation in telecom prices? No. That's called price gouging. To understand the real motive behind this, you need to look at the stock valuations of the big telecom industries. Despite the recent slag, they're doing better than ever, reporting record profits and hiking dividends left, right, and center. All of this profit predicated on an ever-growing chokehold on Canadian telecom, and on the backs of workers forced to bear the brunt of angry customers and morally corrupt sales practices. None of this includes the numerous ethical violations committed by these large telecom companies, including the 2015 fake review scandal, where employees of Bell left false reviews of Bell services all over the internet, many of them being senior employees in the company. And this brings us back to the consistent line of complaints, from higher monthly costs, random hidden fees, and corrupt sales practices. And let's not forget the other telecom companies, because when it comes to customer service, they are ranked amongst the worst companies in Canada. Rogers alone had 861 complaints against them from the Commissioner for Telecommunications, and the time in 2015 where they were fined $200,000 for spamming customers against the CRTC's own anti-spam legislation. Also in 2015, the RCMP, Canada's federal police, even they found Rogers' new cell phone fees for handing over court-ordered documents for an investigation, a little bit too high. Rogers began initiating fees every time there's a warrant for requested info presented to them. So if you thought Rogers was just checking on random fees for the average Canadian, rest assured that your local RCMP office is also fuming with rage. Police wallets matter. This doesn't include the time a customer is called a slut, the recent price hikes taking effect this spring, and the time a TELUS customer was hit with a $24,000 cell phone bill after his phone was stolen. How is that even possible? The time the telecom companies forced together and circumnavigated basic legal rights of a software developer and invaded his home after they found out he developed an add-on that allows people to watch TV on Android streaming boxes, which brings up the topic of piracy itself. As anyone knows, people are cutting their cable subscriptions in record numbers for obvious reasons. And instead of dealing with the underlying issues for why so many people are actually paying money to pirate content, these out-of-touch telecom companies are instead making an enemy out of their former and potential customers. For example, the most pirated show is the Game of Thrones, which is an HBO exclusive that is only available in Canada as a HBO TV package, which means to get a single channel to watch a single show, you need to rent a DVR, pay well over $100 a month for a bunch of useless channels that you don't want to watch, all just to watch a single show at a regulated time that's inconvenient for you. As many of these same companies own the exclusive rights to show content like Game of Thrones in Canada, they also happen to own most of the infrastructure in Canada that carries Canadians' internet. These companies are able to block most pirate sites, which sets a scary precedent. What stops these companies from blocking competitor sites? Sites like Netflix, Spotify, or any of their competitors' news websites. For example, Bell Canada owns a huge portfolio of media sites and radio stations. We saw a lot of this unfolding in the United States, with Comcast and Verizon slowing down Netflix traffic and essentially holding their subscribers hostage. And unfortunately, these media giants treat their employees as poorly as they treat their customers, or should I say, soon to be former customers. and former employees. In fact, numerous employees came forward to reveal a toxic atmosphere of high-pressure sales tactics and greed where they're forced to mislead customers time and time again. We have employees who are forced to lie and mislead customers, all for the profit of a telecom industry both parties hate. All of this while the Canadian government and regulators twiddle their thumbs as if they have no say in the matter. However, it doesn't need to be this bad. If we look to our friends in Europe, we can see the easiest and most simple solution to all our data and entertainment needs: open competition. You see, thanks to the open borders of the European Union, companies from all across Europe can set up shop in each other's countries and compete directly with each other. A UK company that happens to have a strong cellular service and low cost can bring their expertise and knowledge to a country like Spain and compete with Spanish telecom companies to bring prices down and improve customer service. All of this can be done at no cost to the government or taxpayers. Consumers win, and companies who bring better service for lower prices win more customers. It's the best of both worlds. This is why a company like Vodafone, originally a UK telecommunications company, can operate in many different countries, from Cameroon to Qatar to South Africa to Japan to Australia and New Zealand. This open exchange of competitive companies able to transcend borders is the single best solution that allows for prices to be cheap and service to be excellent. Think about all the companies that you enjoy doing business with in Canada. 9 times out of 10, these companies are forced to compete with outside competition, whether from imported sources or from foreign companies setting up shop in Canada. Almost all the industries that are sheltered from outside competition often have appalling customer service, record profits, high prices, and little to no innovation. This is not by accident, but by design. Nothing more clearly proves this example as the 2013 Verizon Spectrum sale. The government Spectrum sale would allow foreign companies to bid on Spectrum so they can operate in Canada. This would introduce competition into the Canadian marketplace by having the American telecom giant Verizon, who would essentially be able to come into Canada and compete directly with other Canadian companies. And to say that this bothered the telecom industry in Canada was an understatement. We saw commercials like this.
When I found out that our government is getting a giant US cell phone company to come to Canada, I thought, will there be thousands of jobs lost?
Then this US giant gets to use our existing infrastructure that took us 25 years to build, and they don't contribute a cent.
So Canadian taxpayers will be effectively subsidizing the whole thing.
I believe communities like the Monktons of Canada should get the same technology that the big cities do. That way, my neighbors can be as productive and as plugged in as people in any other part of the country.
But now, our government is allowing a giant US cell phone company to buy up small Canadian operators that cell phone companies like mine aren't allowed to buy.
When the telecom companies were shaking in their boots, for the first time, they realized they no longer have complete immunity to screw over Canadians time and time again. So they actually instead tried to appeal to the very same people they consistently overcharged and treated with complete contempt. As we know, anytime a greedy Canadian company wants to continue overcharging you, they will continue to preach how it's unfair to allow Canadian companies to compete with foreign counterparts, and how Canadian employees will lose their job, and at last, how this will be the end of Canadian freedom. Well, firstly, being unfair is how business works. If one company does a better job and provides better prices, that's not unfair, that's just how business works. And Canadian telecom companies, just like the banks, don't employ people out of the goodness of their own heart. The second they can lay off workers, they will. And most of all, Canadian patriotism has nothing to do with who you purchase products from. And in our globalized society, most often than not, American corporations do a better job than their Canadian counterparts. Not because they're better, but because the competition that's available in the United States forces them to be better. Air Canada would cease to exist if foreign companies were allowed to fly passengers within Canada. RBC, TD, and the larger banks would definitely not be posting record profits if foreign banks could compete in this country. And to all the Canadians who love their Honda or Toyota vehicles, which many of which are made right here in Canada, congratulations. You are enjoying the benefits of globalization. The goal of globalization is not to put Canadians out of work, but to instead actually force companies to compete on a global scale. and to allow Canadians to have more options, better service, and lower prices than they can ever get from their very own companies. Continuing to employ Canadians in industries where they're forced to scam and rip off other Canadians, all for the sake of having a paycheck, is not patriotism. Unfortunately, the Canadian telecom industry were doing backflips within 24 hours of hearing this news that Verizon could possibly be a competitor in Canada. The telecom giant Rogers quickly bid an enormous sum of $3.3 billion for the spectrum. Just to put this in perspective, Verizon bidded $3.1 billion for a part of the 5G spectrum in the United States, which I remind you has 10 times the population of Canada. It is estimated that Rogers overpaid by $1.5 billion just because they were so afraid of actually competing with a foreign counterpart. Let this be a clearer example of how bad our telecom industry is in Canada. Behind all the angry news stories and half-assed attempts from the CRTC to introduce real change, we will only bring in real change from fully embracing globalization for all sectors of our economy, not forcing some Canadians to compete while we baby and coddle a few selected industries.